He considered trust the crown jewel of their 13-year union. He believed a marriage survived not on fear or surveillance, but on confidence that both hearts walked in the same direction. He had never monitored her phone or questioned her whereabouts. He had never compared her to anyone or measured her with suspicion. He was the type of husband who thought loyalty was not something you requested, but something you earned through consistency and presence. That belief was the foundation on which he built their life. He never imagined that the same trust he cherished would become the very rope she used to climb out of their marriage. That evening began like many others, yet something in the air carried a tone he could not ignore. Her movements were unusually careful, as though she was rehearsing a performance. He watched her apply makeup she had not worn in months. She chose a perfume she kept for moments she called special occasions. She smiled when he spoke, but it was not the warm expression he knew. Her smile looked like a mask trying to hold a secret. Even her voice carried a distant tone, as if she was responding to him from another room rather than from the same kitchen. While he chopped vegetables and stirred the pot on the stove, she placed her phone face down on the table. She claimed she hated that habit in others, yet now she embraced it as though it protected her. He asked a simple question. He did not demand anything. He only wanted to know where she planned to go dressed in a way she had not dressed for him in a long time. She replied that she needed space. Her tone made it sound as though he was the intruder in his own home. He thought about pressing for answers, but he stopped himself. A man who knows his worth does not chase explanations that already contain their message. She walked out wearing a dress he bought her years ago. He remembered the day he gifted it to her. He recalled the excitement in her eyes and how she embraced him after opening the box. The dress once symbolized affection and mutual promise. That night, it became a painful reminder that memories can be stolen by new intentions. As the door closed behind her, he stood still for a moment, unsure whether he had witnessed the beginning of a misunderstanding or the birth of something irreversible. Hours passed. The food grew cold on the table. He did not call her or question her decision. He simply waited. He believed that silence often forces truth to reveal itself more clearly than arguments. His phone buzzed, breaking the stillness of the room. It was a message from a friend who had no intention of hurting him, but felt obligated to share what he saw. The message contained an image taken at a restaurant across town. It showed his wife sitting opposite a man he had never seen before. Candlelight illuminated her face. Her posture leaned forward in a way that suggested interest. She laughed with a freedom he had not heard in years. The picture burned into his mind more than any spoken confession could. Infidelity is not always physical. Sometimes betrayal begins with laughter that no longer belongs to you. He stood in the quiet of his living room, staring at the image, as if it were a mirror reflecting the truth he never prepared to face. At that moment, something inside him shifted. He did not shout. He did not plan revenge. He simply acknowledged the transformation occurring within him. A storm does not announce itself with noise. It begins with a change in wind, a subtle sign ignored by those who refuse to look closely. That night, he understood something essential. The most dangerous man is not the one who reacts without thinking. The most dangerous man is the one who observes, remembers, and plans his next step in silence. He did not lose control. He gained clarity, and clarity would cost her more than she ever expected. She pushed the door open with the caution of someone returning from a place she should not have been. The hallway was dark, and the house felt unusually still, as if it was holding its breath. She expected lights turned on and a furious man pacing the living room. She prepared her mind for questions, accusations, or tears. Yet the only sound greeting her was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the faint smell of dinner that had turned cold. It caught her by surprise. Silence met her at the entrance like a witness waiting to testify. She removed her shoes slowly, hoping to hear any sign of his presence. Her heart pounded, not from fear of what he would say, but from the absence of any voice at all. Nothing is louder than the quiet of a person who has stopped explaining themselves. She walked to the dining room, expecting a battle. Instead, she found the table arranged neatly, plates untouched, cutlery aligned, and beside them a small stack of documents. They were placed with precision, as if he wanted her to notice them without saying a word. Her eyes scanned the papers, but she could not understand their purpose. Receipts, notes, and printed statements lay in perfect order. They were not evidence yet, but they felt like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be completed. The realization unsettled her. He had not ignored her evening. He had observed it. He had not confronted her, because he knew silence could slice deeper than anger ever could. Silence was patient. Silence demanded reflection. Silence made her the only person responsible for her thoughts. She walked toward the bedroom and found him asleep on his side of the bed. His breathing was calm, his posture relaxed, and his face carried no sign of distress. This composure frightened her more than any argument. A man who is devastated reacts quickly. A man who feels betrayed but chooses silence is thinking. She stood by the doorway staring at him, trying to guess what he knew. Her mind created conversations he never said. Every question she imagined had only one answer, and all of them pointed to her actions. Her phone vibrated in her purse. Then it vibrated again. The screen lit up repeatedly, like a restless conscience calling her name. She hesitated before opening it. Messages from the other man appeared one after another. He asked if she reached home safely. He complimented her dress. He suggested they meet again. Each message pushed her deeper into a reality she was not ready to face. Her fingers trembled as she muted the notifications. The vibration felt like chains tightening around her wrists. She lay beside her husband, pretending to rest, yet her thoughts spun like wheels on a slippery road. She waited for him to wake up and ask where she had been. The question never came. The calmness of his breath contrasted with the chaos in her chest. She felt trapped in a conversation that had no voice and no timing. Silence had become a mirror. It reflected her choices without needing to interpret them. It allowed her to hear her own guilt more clearly than any spoken judgment. As the night passed, she realized that silence can be more destructive than fury. Words can be challenged, but silence eliminates defense. A spoken accusation invites justification. Silence allows imagination to design its own verdict. Her guilt now lived beside her, sharing the bed like a shadow she could not shake off. She turned toward him, hoping to find a clue about his intentions. He did not move. His stillness declared something she could not ignore. The conversation she feared had already begun, and he was winning without saying a single word. By dawn, the documents on the table felt like landmines. Her phone felt like evidence of a crime she had not meant to commit, but could not deny. She understood something she had never learned in 13 years. Betrayal does not always end marriages. Sometimes silence does, and his silence had just begun. He woke the next morning with a heaviness that did not resemble anger. It felt more like a sharpened awareness, a clarity that refused to be ignored. Betrayal has a strange effect on the human mind. It removes the filters that once protected illusions and exposes the smallest inconsistencies with brutal precision. He did not decide to investigate his wife. The decision made itself when trust stepped aside and suspicion took its seat at the table. What began as a quiet observation soon became a silent pursuit of truth. The first sign appeared at breakfast. She held her phone with unusual caution, never placing it on the counter as she used to. She clutched it as if it contained fragile glass. When a message arrived, she hurried into the hallway before reading it. She returned with a smile too stretched to be natural. He said nothing. His silence carved more questions than any interrogation could. He realized that a person who has nothing to hide behaves without choreography. Her movements now resembled someone auditioning for a secret role. Over the next days, the pattern grew clearer. She announced a sudden interest in fitness. She bought new workout clothes, changed her hairstyle, and spent long evenings at the gym. He had encouraged her many times in the past to take time for herself, yet she always claimed that exercise bored her. Now she left the house as if she was heading towards something more exciting than a treadmill. She stepped into the night with perfume that lingered long after she closed the door. He watched her go, and with every departure, his certainty grew stronger. The gym was not the destination. It was the excuse. Then came the business trips. She packed lightly for journeys that supposedly lasted days. She offered vague explanations about sudden meetings and urgent tasks. Her stories sounded prepared, as if she had rehearsed them in her head before speaking. He found this odd because she once shared every office detail with enthusiasm. Now her descriptions contained holes large enough for truth to escape through. He checked her company website out of curiosity. No corporate events were scheduled. No travel requirements had been announced. Something was unfolding behind his back, and every clue pointed to a hidden narrative. He began gathering information, not through confrontation, but observation. He memorized the names she mentioned casually. He noted the time she left home and the time she returned. He noticed her sudden avoidance of shared spaces and how she turned her head when he entered the room, as if worried he might read her thoughts. He accessed their shared bank statements and saw transactions he did not recognize. Restaurant bills appeared in locations she never mentioned. Charges for boutiques he never knew she visited appeared without explanation. He stared at the screen, not surprised, only confirmed. One evening, when she showered after her supposed workout, her phone lit up with a message preview. He did not touch it. He did not scroll. He simply read the small fragment visible on the screen. It contained a sentence that did not belong in a marriage. The words were affectionate, familiar, and written by someone who should have remained a stranger. His heart did not break. It hardened. The truth no longer whispered. It stood in the room with him. He made a choice at that moment. He would not confront her in anger. He would not plead for explanations. A man who seeks truth must first gather it completely. He contacted trusted acquaintances, asked discreet questions, and listened more carefully than he ever had. Each detail he uncovered confirmed his suspicions. He saw her reality for what it was, not for what he once hoped it would be. Truth is a door that never closes once opened. He stepped through it and left naivety behind. His investigation did not transform him into someone bitter. It transformed him into someone prepared. And preparation, he realized, was the beginning of power he never knew he possessed. The morning began quietly, with the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the house. He stood in the kitchen stirring sugar into his cup, trying to decide whether the day would be a continuation of silent observation or a moment of clarity. He had spent nights collecting pieces of truth without confronting her. He believed answers had a way of revealing themselves when one stopped chasing them. That exact belief proved right when he heard her voice from the bathroom. He did not intend to listen. Curiosity walked him closer. What he heard transformed curiosity into confirmation. Her tone was hushed, a sharp contrast to the cheerful voice she used in public. She spoke quickly, almost breathlessly, as though she feared being overheard. He expected romantic words, the kind whispered during an affair. Instead, he heard something colder. She was not professing affection. She was outlining a strategy. She detailed timelines and financial expectations as if she was negotiating a contract. The person on the other end did not ask about her feelings. He asked what she would gain once everything was finalized. Her responses were measured and calculating. He stood frozen, the mug warming his hands while her words chilled his bones. She spoke about assets, accounts, and entitlements. She listed items she believed she deserved after leaving him. Her tone carried no remorse. It resembled someone closing a business chapter, not someone ending a marriage. She explained she needed more time to ensure that legal documents reflected her advantage. She said that once she secured what she wanted, she could walk away without worrying about her future. Her betrayal was not impulsive. It was structured like a financial plan. He heard no mention of love or fulfillment. He heard nothing about unhappiness or emotional voids. There was no confession of longing for another man. Her focus remained entirely on profit. Her partner in this conversation pressed her about deadlines. He asked if she could convince her husband to sign certain papers. He asked whether she had access to savings she had not declared. She responded confidently, stating that he never questioned her decisions and that his silence made everything easier. The irony struck him like a knife. The trust he offered had become her tool for manipulation. He stepped back from the bathroom door, his heartbeat steady yet heavy. The realization settled slowly. He was not losing a spouse to passion. He was losing a spouse to arithmetic. She was not cheating with her heart. She was cheating with a calculator. Every act he once interpreted as distance held a different meaning now. The gym was not about health. The trips were not about work. The change in perfume was not about romance. They were steps in a plan to prepare her exit with maximum benefit. He walked back to the kitchen and sat down, letting his thoughts arrange themselves like the documents he had already begun collecting. He understood that love could be repaired when feelings break, but there was no repair when intention was built on greed. He looked around his home and saw not memories, but inventory. Every chair, appliance, and framed photograph became a potential bargaining chip she had been evaluating behind his back. When she emerged from the bathroom, she found him seated, calm and unreadable. She smiled artificially, unaware that the battlefield had shifted. He responded with the same silence that had unsettled her days earlier. She thought she was still in control. She had no idea that her own words had handed him every weapon he needed. Her confession had not destroyed him. It had awakened him fully. In that moment, he understood something essential. Emotional betrayal wounds deeply, but betrayal rooted in calculation strips away every illusion. He was no longer dealing with a wife who had lost her way. He was dealing with a woman who saw marriage as a transaction to be optimized. She believed she had time to perfect her exit. She never imagined that he now possessed the truth she intended to use against him. And truth, once owned, changes everything. The discovery happened on a quiet afternoon when she hurried out of the house, claiming she had forgotten an appointment. Her departure was rushed, and in her haste, she left her purse on the living room chair. He had no intention of invading her privacy. He walked past it several times, battling the instinct to ignore what his mind insisted was an unopened door to truth. Yet something about the weight of silence in that room pushed him. His instincts whispered that answers were no longer hidden in conversations, but buried in forgotten objects. He sat down and opened the purse, expecting to find nothing more than receipts and lipstick. Inside, beneath a set of car keys and a folded scarf, he found a brown folder. It was sealed, but time had loosened the glue. He hesitated before opening it, knowing that once he saw what was inside, he could never pretend ignorance again. The contents were not love letters or photographs. They were printed legal documents. The title struck him first. It was a separation request bearing her full name. He felt a cold stillness sweep through him. The neatly arranged text listed her demands with clinical confidence. She wanted the house, half of his savings, and ongoing financial support. Every sentence reflected calculation, not heartbreak. As he read line after line, memories of their life together replayed in his mind. He remembered the vacations they dreamed about, the mortgage they paid together, and the dreams they once shared. Each memory collided with the reality written in front of him. Her intentions did not include healing, communication, or closure. She had been preparing a future without him, where she benefited from assets she never planned to build. The document did not mention betrayal, only entitlement. Her signature space at the bottom awaited the moment she would present it to him with fabricated tears. He noticed dates typed in the margins. She had consulted someone weeks ago, long before her behavior shifted. That realization tightened his chest. She had not drifted away emotionally and then made plans. She made plans first and created emotional distance afterward. Her life had become a chess game where she moved pieces discreetly while he believed the board still symbolized partnership. The man she was secretly meeting was never her destination. He was simply an exit device, a supporting character who made the process feel justified. He sat back and let the truth settle. He was not being traded for someone else. He was being extracted like a resource. Her betrayal was not romantic. It was financial. His value was calculated in currency, not companionship. He had thought the vows they exchanged formed a bond. She had treated them as a contract with a termination clause. He realized she had rehearsed every lie she told him, not to shield an affair, but to prepare him emotionally for a departure that would leave her with everything and him with nothing. He folded the document and placed it back exactly as he found it. He wanted her to continue believing her secret was intact. That would give him time to think clearly without the weight of emotional reaction. He walked to the window and stared outside, not at the view, but at the future forming in his mind. He understood something he had never considered. He was not losing a partner. He was being liberated from an adversary who had shared his home disguised as a wife. The woman he once admired had transformed into a strategist who saw him as a stepping stone rather than a companion. His heart did not break. It reset. A man suffers when love is wounded, but he becomes dangerous when respect is removed. She believed she controlled the narrative. She believed she had months before the truth surfaced. She believed he would crumble into confusion when she chose her moment. What she did not know was that he now possessed the blueprint of her intentions. She was not the architect of his downfall. She was the architect of her own exposure. He placed the purse exactly where she left it and walked away with calm footsteps. The enemy had revealed herself, and victory always begins with identification. The invitation arrived as casually as if it were any ordinary evening. He told her they should have dinner together, claiming he missed spending time outside the house. His tone was calm, his expression neutral, and his voice carried no accusation. She accepted reluctantly, unsure whether this was an attempt to reconnect or a prelude to a confrontation she feared was inevitable. She dressed with caution, choosing simpler clothes than the one she wore on her secret night out. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied her makeup. Something in her reflection felt different. She was no longer the confident woman who believed she held the upper hand. When she stepped into the restaurant, her steps slowed. The ambience, once romantic and thrilling, now felt heavy and foreign. It was the same place where she laughed loudly with another man. The same candles flickered. The same chairs stood waiting. Yet nothing looked innocent anymore. She saw him sitting at a corner table, poised and composed, as if he had been there long enough to understand every secret she once kept hidden. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes carried a depth she could not decipher. She sat down, forcing a smile that dissolved quickly. The air between them felt like a courtroom where the verdict was already written. She opened her mouth to speak, hoping to steer the evening into safe territory, but before she could release a single word, the waiter appeared beside the table, holding a folded receipt. He handed it to her with a polite nod. Confused, she unfolded the paper and froze. It was the bill from her previous night at the same restaurant. Every dish she shared with the other man, every drink she ordered, was listed in plain ink. Her pulse raced. She stared at the numbers as if they were confessions printed on paper. She turned toward her husband, expecting anger or demands. Instead, she found a calm man sipping water. He did not look triumphant, nor did he appear wounded. He simply existed beyond her expectations. He told her that he paid the bill before she ever walked into the house that night. His voice held no sarcasm. It was almost gentle, yet the message beneath it thundered through her mind. He knew. He had known for days, and she was never in control. She wanted to apologize, but her throat tightened. Words seemed useless. He did not interrupt her silence. He allowed her to sit with her discomfort. She reached for explanations, but every excuse she considered sounded weak. He noticed her trembling hands, but offered no comfort. It was not cruelty. It was clarity. He was giving her the space to confront the truth without softening it. He asked her one question. When did a marriage become something she believed she could abandon without consequence? She tried to answer, but her voice cracked. She attempted to speak about dissatisfaction, distance, and personal struggles. None of it sounded convincing even to her own ears. She could not lie anymore. Her plans, once elegant in her imagination, now resembled broken glass scattered across the table. He listened with an expression that revealed nothing. She realized he was no longer trying to understand her choices. He was measuring something else. He observed not her regrets, but the hollowness of her intentions. She felt as though she was being judged by a man who no longer shared her emotional currency. The bill between them remained on the table, like a monument of her choices. The dinner ended without raised voices. He paid for their meals with the same calmness he displayed at the beginning. She followed him to the parking lot, expecting a final confrontation. None came. He simply opened the car door and drove home in silence. She understood something devastating. He was not chasing answers anymore. He already owned them. He had moved from reaction to strategy, and that single shift placed her in a position she never anticipated. She went to the restaurant once believing she had options. She left it that night realizing she had none. The true weight of consequences does not fall when betrayal is committed. It falls when the betrayed stops carrying the burden. The morning after their dinner, he woke earlier than usual. There was no sadness in his movements. There was clarity. He had spent years building stability, believing that shared effort created shared comfort. Now he understood that comfort had become her camouflage. His silence was not surrender. It was calculation, and that calculation was ready to become action. He began with the bank accounts. For years, their money flowed freely between shared expenses, investments, and future plans. By midday, the accounts were no longer joint. Transfers disappeared like footprints washed away by the tide. She woke to find that her access had been reduced to the balance of her personal account. The credit card she once used without thinking declined during her morning coffee run. She stared at the screen of her phone, confused, as if technology had betrayed her. She called the bank, and the polite voice on the other side informed her that changes had been made by the primary account holder. That was the moment she realized her comfort had never belonged to her. It belonged to the man she now feared more than she ever respected. Meanwhile, he visited his attorney. He had never imagined needing legal armor against the person who once shared his dreams. Yet, as documents were laid in front of him, he discovered something surprising. Years ago, during a property purchase, he had opted for sole ownership for tax reasons. Her name had never been added. The house she planned to claim was legally his. Her assumptions had become her downfall. She had acted without knowledge, believing entitlement was more powerful than preparation. She had mistaken kindness for weakness. He continued from one office to another, solidifying decisions she never thought he had the capacity to make. Every action was measured. He removed her name from investments she never contributed to. He redirected future profits into accounts she could not touch. He closed subscriptions she enjoyed and canceled services she treated as entitlements. The life she lived had been funded not by partnership, but by his devotion. Now devotion had transformed into disengagement, and disengagement was more destructive than anger could ever be. At home, she paced from room to room. The silence that once made her nervous now suffocated her. She checked drawers for documents. She tried to call him repeatedly. He did not answer. He was no longer available for explanations. He had realized something profound. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. She had lived with comfort so long that she mistook it for a natural right. She believed security was an automatic reward of marriage, not a reflection of contribution. By the evening, she confronted him. She asked what was happening. Her voice shook, not from heartbreak, but from fear of losing a lifestyle she believed permanent. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen. There was no rage, no pleading, no sadness, only certainty. He told her that every act of disrespect has a cost. He had simply decided to stop paying it. Her attempts to justify herself sounded fragile. She spoke of misunderstandings, pressure, and loneliness. But these excuses could not erase what she had planned. She had tried to turn marriage into negotiation. He had turned her negotiation into accountability. There is no pain sharper than realizing someone you dismissed as ordinary was quietly protecting everything you took for granted. That night, she sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the same furniture she once admired. Except now she saw it differently. Every luxury she enjoyed had been a gift, not a guarantee. She had married comfort and forgotten that comfort comes from effort, not entitlement. The man she underestimated had never been naive. He had been patient, and patience, once expired, becomes a force more powerful than vengeance. She learned the first lesson of consequences. When you disrespect someone who builds, you do not lose a partner. You lose the foundation your life was standing on. The collapse of a reputation rarely begins with a dramatic explosion. It begins with small fractures that no one notices until the entire structure gives way. She once walked through life with the confidence of someone who believed her social circle admired her. People praised her elegance, her confidence, and the illusion of a solid marriage she displayed at every gathering. She built her identity around the admiration of others. It was the currency she valued more than love itself. Yet admiration, once questioned, evaporates faster than loyalty ever can. The first sign appeared when she called her closest friend, seeking comfort and validation. Her friend let the phone ring until it fell silent. She called again. Nothing. Messages were left unread. She tried another friend, someone who once envied her lifestyle. The result was identical. Silence greeted her everywhere she turned. The social world she once dominated now responded to her like a courtroom audience waiting for a verdict they already believed. At work, conversations shifted when she entered the room. Colleagues who once complimented her outfits now exchanged glances instead. Her supervisor avoided eye contact during meetings. She sensed that something had changed, yet she refused to accept that she was no longer admired. People whispered behind her back, not out of malice, but because they could not reconcile the confident woman they knew with the reality now unfolding. The rumors were not about romance or passion. They were about betrayal, greed, and a plan that resembled a trap rather than a marriage. She attended a birthday party, hoping to restore her social presence. The moment she entered the room, conversations paused briefly. People greeted her with polite smiles that melted away as soon as she turned her head. Groups formed around her, not with her. Eyes followed her movements like spectators waiting for a confession. She attempted to join conversations, but her words floated in the air without landing. The very people who once admired her now viewed her as a cautionary tale. Her name was no longer associated with charm. It became a symbol of entitlement. Her confidence faltered when she reached out to the man she believed would be her next chapter. She called his number repeatedly. It rang once, then ended abruptly. She sent messages, each one shorter than the last, hoping he would respond. Hours later, she discovered she had been removed from his contacts entirely. The realization hit her harder than any argument with her husband ever had. She was not his future. She had been his entertainment. Once the excitement vanished, so did he. She was left holding a fantasy that never belonged to her. At family gatherings, her relatives avoided discussing her situation directly. They exchanged subtle glances each time her name surfaced. Her cousins whispered in corners, and her aunts spoke about responsibility without identifying the subject. She sat among them, surrounded by people but completely alone. Every conversation resembled a mirror reflecting her choices. She noticed that no one defended her. Even those who once praised her ambition now hesitated to associate themselves with her decisions. Her downfall was not public in the way scandals appear on screens. It was private, slow, and relentless. Step by step, she felt the walls closing in. She tried to regain control by explaining her actions to one person after another, but no explanation could erase her intentions. She had built her life on performance, forgetting that an audience eventually sees through the costume. Once the illusion cracks, people remember the truth, not the decorations. In the end, she learned a lesson she never expected. Respect is fragile. It is earned through actions that align with character, not through image or presentation. Once fractured, respect cannot be restored with apologies or expensive appearances. It shatters, and even when repaired, the fractures remain visible. She became a living reminder that the greatest loss is not a marriage or comfort, but the disappearance of a name once spoken with admiration, now spoken only as a warning. The human mind rarely wakes up at the moment of wrongdoing. It wakes up when consequences arrive. She used to believe that her husband's silence was weakness, that his calmness was a sign he would always forgive, always stay, always tolerate. What she never understood was that silence is often the final stage before a choice is executed. When he stopped speaking, she still felt safe. When he stopped reacting, she assumed she had won. When he stopped explaining himself, she thought she had gained control. She did not realize that she was witnessing the silent departure of someone who had already made a decision. She approached him late one evening, her hands trembling as she clutched the back of a chair for balance. Her eyes seemed unfamiliar. Gone was the woman who strutted with confidence. In her place stood someone whose certainty had evaporated. She asked if they could talk. Her voice cracked, revealing a tone he had never heard from her. Not the tone of regret, but the tone of someone who finally understood the weight of consequences. She expected accusation. Instead, his face remained expressionless, and that frightened her more than any outburst could. She tried to start the conversation, searching for words that could soften the damage. She spoke of history, memories, and moments they once shared. She brought up the early years of their marriage, hoping nostalgia could save her. Yet every sentence she spoke sounded like a late attempt to rescue a ship already underwater. He listened without interrupting. She mistook silence for opportunity, not realizing that silence had now become his verdict. When she paused, waiting for a reaction, he finally looked her in the eyes. It was not hatred she saw, it was distance. The emotional bridge she once crossed freely was gone. He explained that loyalty is not something a person demands. It is something they earn through consistency, honesty, and respect. He told her that loyalty is not a cage that traps a person. It is an invitation to stay, given voluntarily. Her breathing grew unsteady, and tears formed even before she understood why. She was not crying because of love. She was crying because she finally recognized her insignificance in a world she believed she controlled. She apologized, but her apology felt thin, like a sheet that could not cover the size of her actions. She insisted she had made mistakes because she felt invisible. She pleaded for another chance and promised change. He looked at her without flinching, as though her words were echoes from a distant room. He said something she never expected. He told her that loyalty cannot be rebuilt with panic. It must be protected before it breaks. Once broken, it becomes a souvenir instead of a foundation. She fell to her knees, not from heartbreak, but from the realization that her strategy had backfired. The man she thought would always be available had stepped beyond her reach. She reached for his hand, but he gently removed it from her grasp. He reminded her that privileges are not permanent. They exist only as long as they are valued. She had mistaken his loyalty for obligation. She had treated respect like a renewable resource. She had used his patience as a shield for selfishness. She had gambled with something she never paid for. In that moment, she realized something she never learned from romantic movies or conversations with friends. Love is not lost in a single act. It dissolves slowly through neglect, arrogance, and the assumption that someone will always be there. She believed loyalty was her right. Now she understood it had been a gift. And gifts, once discarded, rarely return. The room remained quiet after she left. He did not chase her. He did not comfort her. He did not promise anything. She had arrived seeking reassurance, but she left with the truth she feared most. She was no longer part of his future. Realization came, but not in time to save her. Because some lessons only arrive after the door has closed. The transformation did not happen overnight. It crept into the space between them like a change of season. Once upon a time, she believed she could predict every reaction he would have. She thought he was a man who accepted what life gave him, a man who carried responsibilities without questioning them, a man who mistook routine for purpose. She married security, mistook stability for lack of ambition, and confused gentleness with insignificance. It never occurred to her that quiet waters often hide powerful currents. After the tension between them became undeniable, something about him shifted. He did not shout or demand explanations. He did not launch accusations or punish her with dramatic gestures. He simply adjusted his posture the way a person does when they finally decide to stand straight after years of bending. His silence was no longer avoidance. It was authority. He no longer sought validation from her or anyone else. He moved with a confidence that made people stop and reassess everything they thought they knew about him. At work, colleagues began noticing a difference. His decisions came quicker, his voice carried weight in every meeting, and his presence changed the tone of conversations. People who once overlooked him now listened when he spoke. His ideas suddenly gained momentum, not because they were new, but because he delivered them without hesitation. His focus sharpened, and his posture communicated something unmistakable. He was a man who no longer negotiated his value. Family members sensed the change as well. He no longer explained his choices or justified his boundaries. When he spoke, he chose his words carefully, and when he remained silent, people wondered what thoughts were forming behind his calm expression. Relatives who once treated him as a convenient presence now recognized that they had underestimated him. His refusal to react emotionally made him unpredictable. That unpredictability became a shield no one could penetrate. His wife observed this transformation with growing alarm. She had expected collapse. She had expected tears, confusion, and desperate attempts to win her back. Instead, she witnessed a man who walked past her as though she represented a chapter he had already finished reading. Her words once influenced his emotions. Now, they bounced off him like pebbles thrown at a fortress. She tried to provoke conversations, believing she could regain control by stirring his emotions. Yet every attempt fell flat. He no longer engaged in arguments that drained him. He saved his energy for things that mattered. She realized that the man she once dismissed as ordinary was someone she never truly knew. He had always been intelligent, but she failed to see it. He had always been strategic, but she mistook patience for complacency. He had always been strong, but she thought strength only existed in loud declarations. His silence was not a sign of ignorance. It was a sign of preparation. While she built fantasies of escape, he built clarity. His newfound presence affected others too. Friends who once joked about his accommodating nature now respected his decisions. Some even admired him. He embodied a lesson many never learn. Strength is not proven by how loudly one speaks. It is proven by how calmly one acts when everything around them falls apart. His calmness was not apathy. It was discipline. He was not ignoring her. He was outgrowing her. Eventually, she stopped trying to provoke a response. She could no longer reach the version of him she once manipulated. The man who once waited for her attention no longer needed it. He was building a future without her involvement. She saw him not as the predictable partner she thought she had mastered, but as a man whose depth she had never explored. The truth settled over her with cruel precision. She did not lose him because he changed. She lost him because she never bothered to see who he was becoming. Some men speak loudly because they have nothing to say. Others remain silent until their actions tell a story that cannot be forgotten. He was never ordinary. He was preparing. And now that he was ready, there was no going back. Endings rarely arrive with fireworks or dramatic announcements. Sometimes they arrive in silence, wrapped in the consequences of choices that were once made casually. She expected retaliation. She expected humiliation. She even prepared herself for emotional warfare. What she never prepared for was indifference. His lack of reaction unsettled her more than anger ever could. He moved forward with a dignity she could not understand. This dignity became the mirror through which she finally saw herself, and what she saw was not flattering. He did not track her whereabouts or monitor her conversations. He did not seek revenge or involve others in their situation. He simply stopped carrying what was no longer his to carry. He signed the papers she once prepared with confidence, but this time, the signatures were not a victory for her. They were acknowledgments of an ending she orchestrated. She imagined that separation would grant her freedom. She imagined that new beginnings waited for her. What she found instead was a world that no longer welcomed her assumptions. Friends who once envied her lifestyle turned distant. Invitations stopped arriving. People avoided her gaze, uncomfortable with the knowledge that she had gambled with loyalty and lost. Conversations shifted whenever she entered a room. She began to understand that betrayal does not only break relationships, it stains reputations. The silence that once protected her secrecy now wrapped itself around her like a cold blanket. She discovered that consequences are not always loud. Sometimes they whisper every time a door closes before you can enter. He continued to live his life with a calmness she had never noticed before. At work, his confidence grew. He took on projects he once hesitated to pursue. He expanded his investments, made new connections, and embraced challenges without fear. People respected him, not because he sought admiration, but because he carried himself like someone who knew his value. He never spoke about her. He never shared what happened. His silence protected his dignity, and that silence transformed him into someone others looked up to. Meanwhile, she wandered through the remnants of her decisions, trying to understand where her certainty had turned into regret. The man she believed she could replace vanished from her life without a trace. He had no interest in becoming a chapter in her story. He had used her attention to inflate his ego, nothing more. When she reached out to him, he ignored her messages. Her fantasies of a new life dissolved into reality. She realized she had not traded up. She had traded away the only person who truly saw her beyond appearances. She spent nights replaying conversations, searching for the moment she could undo. There was no single moment. The damage was cumulative. It grew each time she dismissed his efforts. It grew when she confused comfort with entitlement. It grew when she mistook his silence for weakness. She had believed love was guaranteed. Now, she understood love is maintained through choices. She had chosen poorly. He never gloated. He never used her mistakes to elevate himself. He simply let her experience the life she built without him. The greatest punishment was not delivered by him. It was delivered by her own reflection. Every regret she carried became a weight she could not unload. She wanted him to forgive her, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because his forgiveness represented the peace she no longer possessed. One evening, she sat alone in the house she was forced to leave behind. She thought about all the moments she dismissed as ordinary. She remembered his patience, his laughter, his willingness to listen. She realized that he was not a man who lacked excitement. He was a man who offered stability, and stability is something you appreciate only after you lose it. She discovered a truth she wished she had learned sooner. Some losses are final, not because the other person leaves, but because the person you became cannot be welcomed back. In the quiet of that night, she understood the true price she paid. It was not money. It was not reputation. It was the knowledge that she destroyed the only person who would have forgiven her if she had asked before it was too late.